I am Jamie Dix. I'm a client engagement leader here for Chapman & Co. Sitting next to me, I've got Fred Falker. Fred has been in the diversity and inclusion space for a little bit. My favorite fun fact about Fred is that couple years, just a couple. My favorite fact about Fred is that he has led some diversity and inclusion efforts at the world-renowned St. Louis Zoo, which is one of my favorite institutions in our city. Fred, I would ask you, what do you think is important for our crowd to know about you?
That I like having fun, that I'm very serious about this topic, and I'm excited actually to be here today.
Actually excited?
Actually.
All right, fair enough.
Which is way more than just a little bit.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you're here. So I want to talk a little bit about our offer that we call Include, Building a More Inclusive Culture. We offer this as an in-person event, both half-day and full-day format. We can do a train the trainer. I think the biggest differentiator for this content, and we will get into this in this webinar, is that this is a distance versus a difference model. And we'll talk about what we mean by distance in a little bit. The other piece that's important is the mindset. Mindset is really important when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, but we want to go beyond that mindset, and we want to talk about what are the behaviors that actually lead us to creating a more inclusive culture. And so for the class, we'll talk about how you assess or approach distance from other people and in those other relationships. We'll talk about listening being a foundational skill that everyone should really work on practicing so that you can close the distance. It is an act of inclusion. And then learning this idea of curiosity and acceptance to strengthen our empathy for others. And then just being inspired to take responsibility for building a more inclusive environment, each of us individually, to do that. So, you ready to get started?
I am absolutely ready.
Awesome. Okay, so Fred and I are sitting here in St. Louis, so we thought it was really appropriate to actually show you a picture of the arch, because that is an opportunity to see. They definitely close the distance in there. And we believe that closing the distance between people and between relationships leads to a more inclusive work environment. And so what do we mean by distance? Distance is that emotional separation that we put between ourselves based solely on what we see as differences. I'm going to invite Maria to launch our first poll question here. A new colleague just started in your department, and you'll notice I'm sitting at your desk. Do you A, quickly walk by and don't make eye contact? Do you B, stop by their cube and introduce yourself? Do you C, stop by their cube, invite them to grab a cup of coffee and get to know them on the walk? So I want to invite you to put down however you want to respond. There is no wrong answer here. Put down how you would respond. And while you guys are coming in, I'm going to invite Fred to answer this question for us. How do you handle a new colleague that just started in your department?
Well, it really just depends.
Okay.
It really depends on how intentional I'm being. I'm an introverted person, and so normally I would probably walk by, I would speak, and then I would hope they would speak to me. If I'm being intentional, and that is part of the effort that we're engaged here in, is that I recognize that I need to share and do certain kinds of things in order to move myself closer to this person so that they will feel included, so that I will be making the effort to actually close this distance.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. It looks like most of you guys in our crowd today said you'd be stop by their cube and introduce yourselves. Great. I'm going to invite Maria to share the next question. When stepping onto an elevator at work, do you A, smile, say hello, and ask how their morning is? Do you B, immediately look down at the ground and maybe mumble a hello? Or do you C, not make eye contact, say anything, and perhaps even move to the opposite side of the elevator? What do you do when you're walking onto an elevator at work?
I know what you do.
Don't tell everybody. All right. Looks like a lot of you guys, the majority of you, smile, say hello, and ask how the morning is. Great. I am going to ask Maria to end that one. I'm going to close it out on my screen here. Fred said he knows how I would answer this question, and I have no doubt that he does, because I'm going to get on the elevator, I'm going to make eye contact, I'm going to say good morning most of the time. And I know that there are people out in our crowd today who are quiet, who might be more introverted, that I actually might frighten them if I get on the elevator because I can be a little cheery in the morning. All that to say, this would be really easy work if we were all the same. If we all approached all of these things the same way, this would be really, really easy. So let's talk about diversity. Like, what do we actually mean by diversity? And we just start with the Webster's Dictionary definition. The condition of having or being composed of differing elements. And so I want to offer over to you all in the chat function, what forms of diversity exist in your organization? When you think about your team, thinking about your organization as a whole, what are some forms of diversity that exist in your organization? And Fred, I'm going to just ask you a question here. What's important about asking this question?
What's really important about this from an organizational perspective is, and we're going to talk about lines that we draw in just a few minutes, but when I work with organizations, I'm typically looking for where is it fragmented, where is it broken, where does it feel like there are silos. And those are the places that we talk about. We've got different divisions and different shifts and different functions. And so diversity in one way are all of those things. And certainly we're going to talk about diversity in terms of more interpersonal kinds of things in just a moment.
Yeah, and we often hear the big ones. We see ages and generations, or diverse way of conversing with other people. Great examples. We do hear the big ones. We hear education, we hear gender, we hear sexual orientation, and then we will even get tenure is a great one. And I see somebody just offered they have a small company, but there's diversity and the difference in age. Great. We hear those big ones, but then we hear really, really specific ones. And I guess for me, when I think about as a leader within an organization, it's important to hear how people are dividing themselves up so that we see sort of to what you just said about the fragmentation. We're really good at dividing ourselves up. And so a really specific St. Louis one that we hear often is what high school you went to, which will tell you a whole lot, or we think it tells us a whole lot about that person and their identity and their family, and we can create these great stories. So we can get really, really good at dividing ourselves up. So we spend a little bit of time thinking about how our organizations and what we see in terms of diversity there. The next piece I want to talk about just for a second is this idea of inclusion. And again, just level setting for everyone so that we're all on the same page is this action or state of including or being included within a group or a structure. And as we think about organizations, the role of diversity, what's the role of diversity and inclusion? Well, for us, we think about if diversity is our team's unique makeup, how we all see ourselves different. Inclusion is how we choose to behave or include someone. That is, in fact, what makes up our culture. And our culture drives really lots of things: performance, innovation, collaboration, creativity. And you'll see over in that gray box, their organizations with inclusive cultures are 2 times more likely to meet or exceed financial targets. It's not just about having difference around the table, though. It's how those folks are included and really seen and as a part of the organization. So I am going to ask Maria to launch our 3rd poll question. You all might be wondering why there's all of a sudden a picture of an astronaut on the moon, and we will get there in just a second. But that 3rd poll question is this: according to a recent study published on Forbes, inclusive teams make better decisions what % of the time? 22%, 6%, 36%, or 87%? Go ahead and throw your response in there. All right. If you answered 87% of the time, you would be correct. Teams make better decisions 87% more of the time than individuals. And the reason there's an astronaut on our screen right now is this is an activity that we like to do in our in-person event, where we give you, first as an individual, a list of 10 items. We're going to tell you that you're stranded on the moon and your goal is to get back to the main aircraft. You have 10 items and you have to rank those in order of importance. And so we do that individually first, we score you, and then we invite you as a team to work on that together. Most of the time, the team comes out scoring better than what the individual did. And for those very few times that the individual score was higher, a conversation that we often hear as well, I tried to talk, I tried to offer my opinion, but no one would listen. And for the group, they would say, well, why didn't you speak up? And so it's just to I think exemplifying what you had spoke to earlier is this idea of listening and how critical that piece of listening really is. I'm going to minimize this just for a second. All right. As we think about culture in our organizations, I think Herb Kelleher, the former Southwest Air CEO, said it really beautifully. It's pretty simple. If you take care of your people will take care of your customers. Those customers take care of your company. And that's what we really want. It's not, we want to focus on the people, and we also want to run a really successful business. It's not mutually exclusive of the other. They can be done together. So I'm actually going to invite Fred to walk us through our very first activity, where we're thinking about the model. This is our model for include, see, choose, and act. And as we see each person, seeing each relationships, our ability to identify the ways that our brain thinks without really thinking becomes important. We're going to talk about the positive and negative effect that those have on our decisions, and explore this idea of what the impact of inclusion can really be on people in the business. So I'm going to turn it over to Fred and have him, you officially get a hold of the clicker.
Wow.
I know. Over to Fred for that first activity.
Let's talk. Are we going into the 9 dots now?
We are.
Oh my goodness. This is my favorite activity in the whole world. Some of you may have seen this before, and this is an activity that we frequently do to really kind of get people to kind of think about how it is that they see the world. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to pick up an ink pen or pencil. Those of you that have seen this particular activity before have a tremendous advantage, so don't cheat, and please don't show anybody else your answer. We want to torture them the same way you probably were tortured the first time you saw it. Here's what I'd like for you to do. You're going to draw 4 straight lines that connect each of the 9 dots, and you must do that without picking up your pencil or ink pen from the paper once you begin. Now, understand, straight lines, so you can't be curved, you can't go over a line. Each line must be straight, and once you start, you can't pick the pencil or ink pen up. Now, while you're thinking about that, let me say the best thing about this is that this is actually really easy to do. We have a lot of fun with it because most people struggle to get it right. The best thing I can say for you right now is that if you struggle, you will be able to go home tonight and do this to somebody else. I'm going to give you a couple of more moments to think about it, and then I'm going to ask you to give it your best shot. And normally what I would do is I would ask how many people get it right. And in any typical group, it's probably 5 to 10% at most who are able to do this. Again, the answer is easy, and yet most of us struggle to get it right.
We don't have to dive too deep into this, but I have seen this so many times, and I still really, really have to think about how to solve this.
But you know how. And the point that we're going to make in this is that once you know how to do something, and this whole model is really based on the idea that once we are aware, once we know how to do something, we are perfectly capable of pulling it off. So now let me give you an answer. I don't know how many of you got it right, but for all of those who did, congratulate yourself, but don't think necessarily that you're smarter than anybody else in the room. You got it right because you see the world differently than many people. So let's look at an answer.
Yeah. There you go. Oh, that went really fast.
All right.
Okay.
So how many of you got that right?
If you want to use the hand raise function in, there you go, Katharina, thank you. If you want to use that hand raise function, let us know. All right. So far, it looks like we got 2 people that raised their hand.
Okay. Now maybe a couple more of you that got it right, but normally this is about right. So here's the important question, and this is why we do the exercise. What prevented you from being able to solve this puzzle easily? As I said before, it's actually easy. It is something that any of us could have done. What made it difficult?
And while you guys go ahead and use the chat function as you're thinking about the answer to that question. Fred, I'm going to ask you a question while people are responding. How does this exercise usually play out when you're facilitating it in real life?
Some people have fun with it. Some people look miserable doing it because we believe we should get everything right. And what we try to explain is that our answers are based on how we see the world. So the difficulty for most people is that they saw, well, let's just show what most people actually saw, and the reason that this is so difficult for most people. I don't know if I've ever said this, but I had a 14-year-old actually do this exercise with 3 lines. And he did it in his head in front of a whole group of people. And what I know about him is that somehow he sees and solves problems differently. So, so let's take a look at what most people saw, and this is what most people actually say.
Here, let me There we go. Should be good now.
So most people saw a box. Now, what's important about it is that while almost all of us saw the box and therefore did not go outside the lines of the box, there is no box there. And this sort of leads us into the idea between difference and distance. Most of the lines that we see, the lines of difference, are actually lines that exist just like that box. We see them quite clearly, but they don't exist out there. They literally exist in our heads. We do see them. But since they don't exist out there, they can't keep us from going outside the lines. There are no lines. And so people say, we didn't think outside the box. The important answer, the important response that I want people to understand is that there is no box. There was no box. The lines that we see exist in our head. We do see them, and they are very important to us, but they can't keep us from acting. Jamie, with that, I'm going to give this back to you and talk about lines for a second.
This is a nice moment. Thank you for sharing.
Well, you're so welcome.
So thank you, Fred, for walking us through that activity. And we talked about, some of you even said in the chat, not looking at the space beyond the dots, or we can't think outside the box. It's just to acknowledge that the box only existed in our head. And so we talked a little bit before about how we see diversity within our own organizations and the way that we think we are diverse. Let's talk about how this works in real life and with people around us in our relationships. Those formation of those lines and boxes happen really, really quickly. So when we say line, for us, that means it's something we mentally draw to distinguish ourselves from someone else. It's just what we do. So I want you to think about a line that you perhaps draw today, and I'll invite you over to enter them into the chat function. While those are coming in, Fred, I'd love to hear your thoughts to the question, what reaction you get when we ask this question. What do people typically say, or how do they respond?
For the people that are thinking about those lines, they'll talk about race, and they'll talk about ethnicity, and they'll talk about all of the differences that all of us see and that right now constrain us and keep us from being able to do things. So people have a pretty good handle on lines. What I think is different for some people is that we've never really considered the idea that we're actually drawing these lines, that we're actually deciding where a line belongs. We had a conversation this morning about what happens when someone, declaring that somebody is a little bit overweight. And how is it that you see that? And if you and I see it differently, then that literally is the line that I'm seeing inside my head. And the same is true for the other lines that we see. Those things matter a lot. They are the source of where we talk about bias. All of that stuff comes from that line, and yet those lines aren't out there. And therefore, those lines can't be the thing that prohibits us from moving forward, from changing our behavior, doing something. And most of the attention that we spend on the lines is unfortunately attention that we need not do. And I think that's what people will see as they go through this model.
Yeah, and I think what you said there, these are some of the examples that we hear when we're in class and we ask people to identify lines that they draw currently. Here's just an overview. But I think what you said is really important in that we can't, and please correct me if I'm not getting this correct, we cannot let those lines that are up on our screen be the reason that we are distant from people.
That would be right. And yet those lines do exactly that, because we look at those lines and say, well, that line is real, and therefore I have to understand that line. I have to remove that line. I have to bridge that line. I have to do all kinds of things to the line. And what it does is it obscures the person behind the line. And my real job is to deal with the human being and not the label, not the line, not the box that I place that person in. If once I recognize that that line is simply something in my head, and it's necessary, it's important. So this is not to take away the importance of how that we categorize, sort, and classify everything in our environment to keep us safe. These things matter to us. It's where we get our identity. And yet, this is not the proper route, not the best route to being able to build better connections, create an inclusive work environment.
And I think what I hear you starting to answer is this question, which of these lines are made up? I'd love for you just to spend a couple minutes answering that.
Well, you've heard my answer before.
I've heard your answer before.
So I will give you that. They're all made up.
And tell me more about that.
The lines that we see are all drawn by us, sometimes for us, but we have to be able to see them. Those lines that are drawn are lines that keep us safe. And one of the very first lines is the line between us and them that all parents draw for their children.
Yeah.
You know, children are born connecting with the world and trying to establish connections with the world around them. What our parents and guardians and people who care about them have to do is say, connect here, but don't connect there.
Yeah.
And so the very first lines that we see are the lines that divide us and them. We later put labels on those lines and say them is, but nevertheless, it is a line that we draw. And for some people, it includes grandma and grandpa and friends and neighbors. And for some, it may be a smaller crowd, but we draw the line. And so all the lines that we see, the lines for class, the lines for ethnicity, are always drawn. And yet, I don't want to take away from it. They are important, really important to us.
I think the piece that I love to hear is that while we're really good at drawing the lines and even behaving as if they're real, people see lines when they see us. And so I put myself in with everyone else. I see people, I draw lines at times, but people are doing the same thing when they see me. And so one of the activities that we do and include that has been powerful is this idea of that we're more than what people see.
Right.
So we ask participants to think about the obvious things that are about you, the things that some people might already know, the things that people can really obviously see. And then we want you to think about what are the lesser known things. And so things that people don't know or can't see, things that you might not have on your LinkedIn profile page or your Facebook page. So we offer this as an opportunity for participants to get to know each other a little bit better. And the idea here, you'll see up on the screen some examples of what we've heard in class before. So we have this idea of I am, these are the things on the left-hand side, things that are known about me, things that people can obviously see. On the right-hand side, I am also, or I am not. And these are the things that are lesser known, things that people might not be able to quite obviously tell. So just to call out a couple, which I can relate to, is I am detail-oriented, but I am also really messy. I am African American. I am also rhythmically challenged was one of my favorite ones we got in class.
I didn't say that.
And it wasn't Fred.
True, but it is true also. So
well, that's we'll let us this. Do you want to dance? Is that what you're asking to do right now?
I
okay. Another one that I really thought was powerful is I am a military veteran, but I am not a hero. Just the assumption that we make because you served in the military that you are a hero. And for him, he said there are lots of people who did lots of other things beyond what I felt like I did. And so I want to throw it over to you guys in the chat. When you think about the things that people know about you, what are you in addition to that? I am an extrovert for myself, but I am also someone who really enjoys quiet time and thinking time. So I want to put it over to you in the chat section. What is something that people know about you that you are also or you are not? And get some examples. I'm going to ask Fred to offer some thoughts for him. What do people see when they see you?
Well, they see an African American. People that know me see a basketball official, but I'm still actually officiating basketball games. They see somebody who tries to have a good time. Hopefully they see the line of, I'm really a funny guy. I know it's hard to figure out sometimes, but
that's not true. You're very funny.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyway, so some people see that line, and my wife sees a guy who's not really taking care of the house and cleaning dishes in the way it's supposed to be done. But I'm working on
working
those
on
things.
that.
I'm trying to be better.
All right. So I want to think about just for a second what we take away from this activity. And I would offer, for some folks in class, it's powerful to them because, like I said, we really quickly draw the lines around things we see about people. And we are so much more than that. So one of the things for some people, it is a powerful activity in that they get to learn more about someone else. Right. What would you offer here as a takeaway, or what are your thoughts here?
I think the most important thing that I can offer on this is that knowing more about people is not the same as knowing them. And so the idea of decreasing and reducing distance, which again, we're going to talk about, is how you come to know people. knowing more of the lines, knowing more of the stereotypes and generalities and things about a person, why that can be comforting, that can be a good thing, but that is not the same thing as knowing people.
Yeah.
We want to create an inclusive environment. We create an environment where people feel that they are a part of that thing and that they are connected to that thing. And those connections are those that are emotional connections.
Yeah.
So I'm not emotionally connected to an environment because of policy. I'm emotionally connected to it because of my relationships with people. And so that becomes the crucial thing for leaders as we begin thinking about what does it mean to create an inclusive environment. We can change policies, but if we don't change our behavior toward the people that we lead and manage, if we don't help them change their behaviors toward each other, then this environment will be inclusive only in name only. We can do much better in great organizations, I think, are places where people feel a sense of community. They feel that they belong in that place and that they are a part of that place. And that's real inclusion.
Yeah. And I think part of what you just said was this activity, while we think we know a little bit more about someone, we will never truly know them until we know their story, more of their story, and our ability to really listen to somebody is when that happens. All right. We are moving into the choose piece of our model, which is this idea of experiencing what happens or what keeps us distance from some other human being, and then identifying really specific behaviors that either close the distance with somebody, or I'm going to stay right where I am, or I actually might be distancing myself from you. So what are those really specific behaviors that do that? And so the idea of choosing is just to select the best or most appropriate out of two or more alternatives. That's it. So the activity that we do here, and I'm going to just invite you guys to do this, think about it, is what we call the distance scale. So I'm going to show you 4 pictures, and I want you to think about in your head, are you going to approach this person? Are you going to maintain your distance with this person? Or are you going to actually avoid this person? So as I'm going through these, just a 1, 2, or 3, I want you to be thinking about how you would respond to this. I'm going to just leave each one up for a couple seconds here. All right. As you guys are thinking about how you reacted to that, I'd love for it to hear some of your responses in the chat function again. What did you react to? What maybe caused the difference in your response number, 1, 2, or 3? So what did you react to? And I'm going to ask Fred that exact same question. What do you react to?
I react to smiles. I react to body posture, and I react to dress. And the truth is, all of us react to very different things. And one of the things that we see when we do this exercise is that the same face seen by 2 or 3 or 4 different people creates different reactions. So as we think about building and creating a more inclusive environment, we have to recognize that we're all literally seeing each other and seeing each other differently. So some people I look at and say, wow, he looks really friendly. Somebody else sees that same person as being unfriendly. And so when we work in this area, we want to make sure that we recognize that differences are not things out there. They're the things in our own heads. And what really matters is how I see that particular person. And we certainly see that when we see this exercise.
Yeah, and Garen, you had offered that the lack of smile throws you off 100%. I think that was, if we want to file that under friendly, maybe that's how we would file that under. But I think about in class when we've done this activity, one of the things that always surprises me is sometimes people want to go to the dark alley. Well, in a dark alley and my car's broke down, I'm definitely not going to. I think as we think about our organizations, of course we want you to stay safe. We're not asking you not to stay safe, but we're talking about in our organizations, how are we approaching, maintaining, or avoiding those who are closest to us every single day. And so the behaviors that we want to think about here for a second, if you chose approach on any of those, you are likely going to be actually closing the distance.
Yes.
I may be moving towards you. I may be smiling and making eye contact. If I chose number 2, which was maintain, more than likely I'm tolerating that person and staying right where I am. And if I chose avoid, more than likely I'm going to physically distance myself from that other person. You walk into the room, you see that person, you walk back out. So as we think about those behaviors, here's a list of behaviors that we have come up with that might fall under approach, maintain, or avoid, or as we call them, closing, tolerating, and distancing. And I'm going to invite Fred to speak here for a minute or two on that middle section, the tolerating behaviors.
I think what we find in terms of tolerating behaviors is that is how most of us treat most people most of the times. And there's a word for it, and it's called professional. And so I don't want to offend. I want to make sure that they have their needs met. But from a leadership perspective, or a perspective of trying to have a more inclusive environment, tolerating people is not part of inclusion. Inclusion is literally connecting with people in only one category up there, and that is the approach and closing behaviors manage to do that for us. So when we have an organization where we are tolerant of people's differences, where we are acting in the fashion that you see on that list, so we're not being personal, we don't want them really to know us. Again, we could have all the policies in the world that would suggest that we're inclusive. Yeah. It doesn't feel inclusive because people aren't connecting to other human beings.
Yeah. I'm going to invite Maria to do poll question number 5, because I think something you said was really important in that just the professional, almost keeping them at an arm's length. And so the question I want to offer to you all, what percentage of employees report feeling isolated in the workplace? Is it 25%? Is it 40%? Is it 75%? Or is it 90%? Feeling isolated in the workplace. All right, so it looks like if you answered 40%, that would be correct, which I will just jump up to. That's almost half of folks within a workplace feel isolated. Right. How do you respond to that being the answer?
I respond by saying that's pretty sad. So we're at a place where we are bringing lots of our attention. We're there in order to it's a big portion of our lives, and yet we feel that we are alone. And we're alone because of lack of human connection. It's not policy. Right. It's the fact that we have not connected to other human beings, and they have not connected to us. Distance is the reason that that's happening.
And that's what I was just going to reiterate. We've spent some time, even in our short time together, talking about lines, talking about differences, but that's not what's actually keeping us isolated at work.
That's right. It is the emotional separation that exists between two human beings. Yeah. I see the line. I make some determination about what the line means, but again, that line is not out there. That line is in my head, so it has to be something in me, and it literally is me hiding myself from this person. It is me keeping my distance. So the distance is emotional, and the emotion is not them. That emotion is me. Am I afraid? Am I anxious? Am I angry? Am I upset? The idea of choosing is now, once I know that this is the condition of this relationship, what am I going to do about it? Well, if I'm a leader, I hope that what I'm going to do about it is really work hard to build a more inclusive place. I hope as a leader, I'm trying to instill this kind of behavior in the folks that I'm working with. This is the culture that we want, where we move toward other human beings and that we connect with other human beings. When that happens, this environment, everything that we do feels different. It feels different because, frankly, it is different.
One of the, when we think about, I think one of the things I like about this content the most, and not just because you created it, is this idea that we all have a responsibility.
Yes.
As you think about being in relation with one other person or somebody, even on a different floor, the responsibility is on each of us to behave in ways that is closing the distance.
Right. Okay. So that is always moving forward.
Yeah.
It's making that choice. So it's see, choose. Once we're aware of the space, now we can make the choice to either continue tolerating or distancing, or to decide to close. So that's the beauty, I think, of the model. Once I'm aware that I'm doing these things, and that I am not closing, that I am not connecting, I am not attempting to relate, now it really is on me. And that choice is something that's always right there in front of us. It's a choice that I don't think we should take lightly, and yet it's a choice that we all get to make.
Yep. Yeah. I want to offer this slide, difference not being the problem.
Right.
The problem is the distance that difference, perceived difference creates. And so you've been in this space for a couple of years.
Yep. A couple.
Just a couple. What does this slide mean to you?
For me, this slide really is everything. And once I start seeing myself and another person in relationship, then it's on me to kind of either improve the quality of that relationship or to make a decision. I'm not willing to do that. I'm not going to do that. But I have a responsibility, and I have an opportunity. There are possibilities in front of me as soon as I see you or anybody else as a human being. It's at that moment that we become an us. And so the question is, what is the nature or quality of the relationship that I have with the people that report to me? I recognize that as a leader, there's some people I like a little bit more than others. And I probably worked pretty hard to reduce the distance between myself and those individuals. There are other people that I like fine, but I don't like them the same. And if I'm not delivering that same kind of attention, if I'm not moving toward them, then ultimately they will not feel included in our environment. So we want to move past the idea that it's simply policies, that those things absolutely matter. But if we get those things right and still don't connect as human beings, we don't have an inclusive workplace.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things, and this sort of goes back to my comment around the distance scale activity, we show a series of pictures and we hear very quickly that whether or not I choose to approach that person depends. Depends on a lot of things. So I'd love for you've been doing a lot of writing and you've been in this space for a while. Would you be willing to just talk us through this slide? What is this, as you think about being in relationship with someone else? What are some of the things you're considering?
I think this slide is broken out, and I think all of us have a sense. You don't have to break this out in your head, but here are the considerations to make that choice. The first thing you want to ask, is it safe? And so we recognize how the human brain works, the fight, flight thing. It doesn't matter whether it's a real physical threat or if it's something that we're seeing in a movie. Is it safe? And the answer in most cases, of course, it's safe. The second thing is, can I make a difference? We can't necessarily close every single time that we see another human being, but there are times when I can make a difference. There is a need this person has or a need that I have, or I'm trying to make the organization a better place. If I can make a difference, then perhaps I should choose to do that. Do I have the strength and courage necessary to do this? Sometimes closing the distance it requires courage. It requires us to be vulnerable. It requires us to open ourselves up. You and I have talked about Star Trek. We talked about deflector shields, and I know you don't like Star Trek.
You talk about Star Trek, I listen.
Okay, well, let's talk about Star Trek for a moment.
I'll let you.
Captain Kirk always wanted to know. He always traveled with his deflector shields down, and so at some point in time, somebody would say, "Captain, what about the shields?" And so the question becomes, if the shields are there to protect you, the shields are there to protect the Enterprise and its crew, why not travel with them up all the times? That literally is how many of us operate in the world. We're traveling with our shields up. And why not for the Enterprise? Because it was exploring brave new worlds, because it was attempting to form connections throughout the universe. And as human beings, we operate with our shields up. Shields up being simply distance. It is the space that we put between ourselves, and others. To decide to move forward is to say, I need to lower my shield. But when I lower my shield, I feel open. I feel vulnerable. That is a very important thing. Do I have the courage at this moment to expose myself to you as a human being. What we know is that when I do that and when you do it and others do it, the chances are much greater that they will do it also.
Yeah, and I think about this one just in day-to-day work, inside our organizations, but also just out in Starbucks line or wherever you may be. There are days that I have the strength to do it. There are days that I find myself shields down, and there are other days that I don't feel that way. And so are you asking us to always have the shields down?
No, I'm asking them that we always make a choice. So if you travel with yours up all the times, and I do, I'm a human being, that we make this deliberate, conscious choice from time to time. I can and should do something differently. That next one is, am I willing to show up differently? You know, the truth is we have shields up for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because of pain or something that's happened to us, something that's occurred. If I'm not willing to give that up, if I'm not willing to give that away, to get rid of it, then I need not choose to move forward. So if somebody has really hurt somebody, that is something that we can move beyond, but it's not something that I would tell you you have to.
Correct.
But it is a choice that we make, and that we see people make that choice. Should I call my uncle up? I haven't talked to him in years and years and years and years and years. What happened a long time ago happened. Am I willing to give that up in order to move toward it? That's a choice that I have to make. And the last piece is, am I willing to own my own contribution to this relationship? We're always in a relationship with other human beings. And so I am always a part of that. My piece is my behavior. Am I willing to own my piece? I don't control how you respond, but I know that by my responding, am I willing to own my contribution to the whole? And so when you're working inside of an organization, are you willing to own your contribution to the health and well-being of that organization? If so, then you probably should choose to move forward and do things differently.
Yeah, and I just want to really quickly, Kimberly, you said you have to be willing to be vulnerable and uncomfortable. Yes, at times this will feel very vulnerable and very uncomfortable. And as leaders, I would offer you have to go first, because for some, you know, whether we want, hierarchies are really real thing in the world. And so for some that aren't necessarily that high up on the hierarchical totem pole, that feels like a scary, risky thing to do. And so as leaders, are we willing to really close the distance?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think when we find leaders that do that, you find organizations that seem to be different.
Yeah.
They really seem to be different because you're seeing it modeled.
Yeah.
I mean, it can take place any place inside an organization, but when the leader models this kind of behavior, when the leader models seeing human beings, really working to know human beings, knowing their names, listening to their stories, and the powerful things that actually happen inside of Include. When you've got a leader that's doing those things, you're creating a very different culture, and people will see that. People certainly respond to that leader very differently than leaders that stay closed.
I think about the leaders that I've had in my career, and I absolutely knew something about each and every one of them, personal things, and they took the time to get to know me as a human being, and they took the time to also share about themselves and their families. And so that relationship is important, and how leaders choose to show up is really important to the health and well-being of an organization. And
I think showing up, we do that naturally, but the best leaders, I think, do it intentionally. And that they recognize on those occasions when they would not otherwise be inclined, and say, it's important that I show up and be this person. That is the idea of choosing. So we don't always get it right, but when I'm choosing, I'm always aware that I have the choice this day to work outside of the lines, to see other human beings as humans and not as their differences and not as their labels. I have the choice to recognize that the distance is something in my head. It's something that I feel, and that there's something that I can do about it.
One of the questions before we've got about 15 minutes left, but one of the last questions I want to ask or just have a conversation about is this idea of time. It takes so much time, Fred. Like, how do you respond to people who say, that's great, closing the distance is great, and it's an aspirational goal I want to have as a leader, but it takes a lot of time. What's your response to that?
I think it's really what's the quality of the organization, quality of the community that you want. This is an investment in the lives of employees and their families. It is a small investment that pays huge dividends, and it's not always in better performance. I mean, we invest in human beings and human connections because they're human beings, and human connections are important. The truth is we tend to get more out of that in terms of return than we put into it. But if we're doing it to get a return, then I would suggest that perhaps we're doing it for the wrong reason. They're human beings. Yeah. We can lose some of them sometimes and still feel good about the relationship that we had with it. And I just believe that, you know, things happen for a reason. And so if I'm going to lose an employee, I want that employee to know that I cared about him or her as a human being, yeah, even during that painful period. And that is determined by how I show up every day. Yep. I don't need to dislike somebody to have them no longer be part of the organization. How we show up shouldn't always be about what we hope to get, but who we establish, who we want to be as human beings.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Thank you. I'm putting the rest of our model up on the screen for you all, and we'll wrap up with a few comments. But as we've got a little over 10 minutes left, if you have any questions for Fred or myself, please put them in the Q&A and we will get to them at the end here. But this is our model. We walk through a full day or a half day with your team. Our ability to see each person, see each relationship, see the distance that is in each of those. What are we choosing to really do once we notice that there is distance? And this idea of acting with intention, listening is such a big piece of that. Choosing to listen to those around us and those relationships that are around us is an act in and of itself of inclusion. I'm willing to listen.
Listening is so powerful. It is, of all things I've ever seen, listening is the most powerful thing. If you think about what real listening does, is it causes us to focus on the person in front of us. Yeah. And literally that is the magic in listening. It is my focus. It gets rid of distractions. It gets rid of all of the other things I might be thinking about, the difference, about the labels I put on them, about how I should act, about how I should behave, about what I should say. Now I'm focused simply on them. And what happens when I focus on another human being is I start feeling with that person. Yeah. Now the relationship becomes more and more apparent. And I also recognize I'm moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Just a really quick example. I was recently facilitating, not this class, but sat in on a triad with a couple other folks, and how quickly we draw lines or how quickly we make judgments about folks. I sat down and had some going on in my brain. And as this woman started sharing her story, and I found myself really getting into the listening piece of it, I was able to just connect with her on a mother/wife level that was really, really powerful. So just to offer that listening is such an important piece of this work and what we're willing to do. We have a good question. All right, my team's telling me we've got a question in the Q&A, so I'm going to pull that up. Garen, thanks. She said, besides modeling, seeing beyond the lines and closing the distance, how do you encourage this kind of behavior in those who report to you?
I say one thing you can do is to really kind of teach the model. So that would be something that would happen and include, but just to talk about what the model is, it really is to act with intention. Yep. And so the things that go into the model are things that we already know how to do. Yeah. We know how to close. If you go back to that screen that you will have in your packages where it talks about closing behaviors, those are the things literally that we need to do intentionally with people that we otherwise would not do those things. Yeah. And so that is how we start teaching, but modeling it is huge. Modeling it is important. Helping people understand that we do see differences and that they matter, and we want people to see our differences. And yet, those lines exist in our head. What we are separated by is emotional space that we place between ourselves and others, and therefore we can do something in terms of making a choice when we want the world to be different, or we want to be different, or we want the relationship to be different, then there is something we can do about it.
Yeah.
That is something that we can teach people, that they can walk out of these sessions knowing exactly what to do from that moment on. And that is something that you can't unsee once you start seeing relationships. If you see the relationship, you can't stop seeing a relationship. You sense it, you feel it.
Yeah. Great question. Thanks, Garen. Mark has a question in there next. Where does advocacy for disadvantage come into play with this approach?
That part doesn't go away. So you can always advocate for things. You can always recognize when things are not fair. You can change policy. You can do all of that. And yet, if we do only those things and we don't connect human beings to human beings, we're still missing some huge fundamental piece.
Yeah.
So this is not about not doing those things. This is not really about not talking about social justice. All of those things continue to matter. And yet the piece that all of us have the ability to change ourselves, and that moment, at the moment of decision, which is, am I going to connect or work to connect, to establish connections with another human being? That is the piece where I feel better regardless. We continue to do those other things, but we can change our piece of the world, each and every one of us, when we make the decision to do so. Yeah, this is not stuff not in our circle of control, circle of influence. We have a lot of influence here.
Absolutely. Garen, great question again. How do you redirect those in your group who don't follow this model and in fact might be enforcing those lines? What are your thoughts? How do you redirect?
Well, I think maybe the big thing is not to draw lines between ourselves and them. And that's really hard, because we're saying, hey, it should be different. And yet they're seeing the world very differently. They're seeing the world in what I would say would be the old way.
Yeah.
And so we've got to do for them what we're advocating that they should do for other people. This is how they see the world. How much distance is there between myself and a person who is still doing the things that I think they shouldn't be doing? If there's a great deal of difference, then I have to recognize it. Then I have to make a choice to close that distance. And it's inside of that new relationship, that connected relationship, where I have an opportunity to have my story heard a little bit better, to really respond and listen to their story in a way that they feel validated. And at some point in time, if it's to be, then they may change.
The other, Garen, that was a great question. And just quickly, and I'm not implying that this is what you were doing, but how quickly we do draw the lines, those that will get this model and those that won't get this model. And so just as another thing you can do, and I'm putting these up on the screen, identify those people where you feel like there is distance in those relationships, especially in your workplace, maybe on your team. Make that choice, as Fred has said a number of times, to close that distance. And that may look like listening and asking some really open-ended questions. Right. So when you think about those who might not fully understand our model, asking them, tell me more, or what's hard about that for you, to get them to, so that you can have a deeper understanding of who they are and how they might be perceiving the world. So those are some things that you can do. The last one on the screen there is run the I am but activity with your team. And this might give you an idea a little bit more about the people who are sitting around the table. I think Fred and I would both say it's never going to give you the entire story of someone, but it'll give you a little bit more of an idea of who they are. And that activity sheet will be included on a resource in the email that we send up after this. The last thing I'm going to ask Maria to do is launch our last question. And this is for some feedback for us. We are always looking to improve our webinars, improve how we show up here. And so if you would please give us just a couple more minutes and give us some feedback for this specific webinar, we would really appreciate it. As you guys are finishing that up, I'm just going to throw up on the screen here a little bit about what we do at Chapman & Co. We do leadership development. We do have training courses, workshops, and keynotes and consulting. The other one we have is assessments. We've done, we created our own assessment on people, process, and performance. So if you have any questions about those, you are able to contact either myself here at CCO Leadership, and Fred's email is also listed up there His company, Falker Consulting Group, has been around. I just want to say thank you for being part of our time together today. It was fun to have a conversation, and we even talked about Star Trek. I am very impressed with how you brought that in. Well done.
It's very smooth.
It was very smooth. Thank you. All right, we're going to keep that last feedback question up on the screen for a few more minutes. I'm going to go ahead and mute Fred and I over on this end, but we will stick around for a few more minutes. If you guys have any other questions that you want to throw up into Q&A, we will be happy either to come back live and answer them or just respond in the chat function. So let us know we are still here.
Detailed answers for his previous 2 questions as well.
Hey, Garen, we just saw your next one come up. How long it usually takes to see changes in culture when a leader starts introducing these kinds of models? I told Fred that we should say 2 weeks, but that's not true. We like to use humor around here too. To phrase it a different way, how long should I wait until I can tell if I'm doing something wrong?
I think if you're doing something intentionally and you follow part of this model, you won't be doing anything wrong. The idea of really working to connect with other human beings is a great idea, period. And it can't be wrong.
Yeah, those, Fred had mentioned those behaviors that were up on the screen, the closing, tolerating, distancing behaviors will be in the slides that we send to you after. And so as you look at those behaviors, particularly on the closing side, and intentionally choose those, right, you'll be on the right path.
That's right.
Would be my take on
right.
that.
And that's really, that's work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's work. And to do it more often, to need to think about it less, means that you're beginning to respond to human beings in a better way.
Yeah.
And I think anybody around you is likely to notice that.
Yeah.
How long it takes for them to change, we don't exactly know, but we do respond to people treating us as human beings. And so I think that's what we can know. If you can start putting this kind of information into the culture, giving people information about the choices that they can make, it will happen. I mean, part of our issue is that people don't recognize that this is a choice.
Yeah. Caroline, great question. How do you measure if you are moving the needle? Great question.
You'll see it a little bit in engagement surveys. You certainly will see it in terms of how, you know, if our most important relationship is with our boss, that will begin to change. If we're looking whether or not we have a best friend or friends inside an organization, you'll begin seeing all that. But more importantly, in the organization that I happen to work for, you'll feel it.
Yeah.
And there will be no doubt that it begins to feel like a community as more people begin doing this.
The other thing I would tack onto that, Caroline, is just to, because this could be a huge conversation. What is it that you're seeing currently that you would like to not be seeing anymore would be one way. So if we benchmark like, hey, I don't know, everyone just goes to their queue when they get into the office in the morning. No one's really talking. If there are really specific behaviors that you can articulate for your organization, we start by asking them how, maybe it is an engagement survey, asking how people are feeling, and then really intentionally choosing these behaviors for 6 months and measuring again would be one way to do it. Happy to jump on a call later and hear more about maybe what you're asking there. Thanks so much for the question. All right. Right, we'll stay live for a couple more minutes. If anything else comes up in Q&A, we will be here. Again, just really appreciate everybody's time. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to either Fred or myself. Looks like we have about 10 people still on the line, which is cool. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. Also connect with us on LinkedIn. We're happy to be connected that way. Maria Olivos is also in the room here today. If you have questions for her, let us know how we can help. We'd love to have a further conversation about this work. Fred, any last words?
No, I would say good luck, but you don't need luck. This is really work. This is effort. This is changing how you see the world. There are no lines.
Yeah.
It's just distance and space, and we can behave and do differently and make a better world.
Caroline, I'm reading your comment here. Not a question, just wanted to offer that this unconscious and conscious bias also affects cross-functional work, regulatory versus commercial. As an example, lots of assumptions about the types of people and particular functions that cause barriers.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
Good pick up.
Yeah. All right, guys. Again, appreciate everyone hanging on and hanging on a little bit longer. You know how to reach us. Actually, I'll put our email up there one more time, leave that up there. Thanks so much.